Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending October 15th. And actually got some pretty cool stuff going on this week. A few challenges, but some really cool stuff too. So we're just gonna hop right on into it. And we are going to start, as we always do, with Aries. We're going to kick off the week with an Aries moon. Actually, we're pretty much going to kick off the week with an Aries full moon. Aries full moons, they're kind of my favorite, actually. They're a lot of fun, a lot of energy that I can really resonate with. But of course, they also have a tendency to create more emotional outbursts, especially for the sign itself. And in this case, for you Rams, there may be a little bit of tension, specifically around certain things in the home, or the kind of challenges and difficulties that maybe you have been having recently. It just sort of blows up and gets a lot more intense, and that intensity, while very annoying to have to deal with, unfortunately, is actually a really good thing, because it brings it to a boiling point to where it absolutely needs to be addressed. So it's no longer simmering. We tend to kind of ignore things when they're simmering, but when they blow up, it sort of gives us a chance to go, okay, I'm tired of this issue. Let's just sit down and see if we can't come to terms with some sort of an agreement, a truce, whatever it is that you're going through. And it's really necessary, I really feel, to do that, because if you don't, it becomes underlying emotional challenges within the relationship that never really go away. And obviously our ultimate goal is not to keep it going forever, but to see if we can't find some sort of solution for it. We also have Jupiter, and Jupiter continues to be retrograde this week for the entire week. And Jupiter still is in that opposition, actually that T square, really, with Mercury, which is no longer retrograde. We're not even in a shadow period anymore. We're all done with that. Let's all breathe a sigh of relief here. As well as Mars, and Mars being your ruling planet, being in what seems like a challenge against you, can be a little bit tricky, because it's not that you're using that Mars energy in your favor. It's actually almost like it's working against you in some way, if that makes sense. Mars focus is very much on relationships. Mercury's focus is on long-term goals, and when you're sort of stuck in the cusp, Jupiter is like right on the cusp of ruling your home, but also how you think. There's a really big element, actually, in this challenge of the challenge being bigger or smaller, depending on how you approach the challenge or how you look at the challenge. Now, in my experience, personal experience, as well as within working with other people, and one of the biggest things that I see, and one of the biggest things that I have experienced, is that the more that I sit and stew over a problem, the bigger the problem becomes. And this challenge actually may be coming up not necessarily um because you need to fix certain things within your relationships, but maybe it's time to really pay attention to your responsibility in your perception of these relationships. Hopefully that makes sense. By doing so, you may actually be changing the way that you approach different situations within those relationships, and changing the way that you approach those situations might actually open the door for resolution of the challenge. And it's more about doing something and less about stewing in it or overthinking it, if that makes sense. And that's, Aries has the type of brain that does that, just like many other signs. And it's a hard habit to break. But in the long run, it's a habit that will really help you if you eliminate it. It's just not something that is helping you right now, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Taurus. We continue to have Uranus in Taurus, and Uranus continues to be retrograde, continues to be in that square with Saturn, which is also retrograde. So nothing has really changed there. The Taurus's focus is on those that you love this week. And with that challenge with Saturn, which is very much on the past, this is quite possibly going to bring up some past difficulties and challenges within these relationships that are more than likely triggered because of certain situations that you're currently dealing with within the relationship. And this happens a lot when you have challenges within certain relationships that can be difficult or have a history of being difficult. Every time you approach a difficulty within that relationship, it's like all the past muck just comes up, and this turns into just another thing on a pile of stuff within this relationship, and it makes these challenges so much bigger than they really need to be. And it doesn't mean that by not doing this, you're not making it a challenging relationship, or the challenge of the relationship is just going to disappear into a puff of smoke. It doesn't really work that way. We wish it did, but it doesn't really work that way. But really, honestly, we create so much in our own minds and inside of ourselves emotionally, these huge piles of betrayal and jealousy and rage and disappointment in these difficult relationships. And the more we throw sticks on that pile, the heavier it is to move it around and carry it around, because let's face it, you're moving it around and carrying it around everywhere you go. So it also makes it difficult to approach the relationship without all of that stuff kind of sort of hanging over you. So it triggers them, they're triggering you, they're throwing triggers back and forth. And then before you know it, it's just this massive trigger fest that doesn't really help the situation. It doesn't really do anything for the situation. It just keeps it in the same difficult challenge that it has been all this time. And that's not helpful. And the longer that goes on, the more difficult it is for both people. My advice is to really just, if you're in that situation with a person like that, try your hardest to not focus on all the difficulties that you dealt with in the past. If you can approach what you need to do it is in as clear a way as you possibly can. Obviously, you're not going to be able to just forget it all like it didn't happen. And I'm not saying that you should. But by setting it aside and just focusing on what's going on now, as opposed to the 5, 10, 15, 20 years of a history that you have with this person, it just changes the energy. It makes it not quite so difficult. You can approach the difficulties now, but you're not bringing past difficulties in that may trigger difficulties for them, hence sort of eliminating that sort of ping pong game of triggers, if that makes sense. The moon coming into your sign on Tuesday and Wednesday is really going to kind of mess this up a little bit, as it creates this emotional element to this whole thing. But the good news is that we still have that beautiful grand sextile that's been really helpful throughout all of these challenges, with Pluto, which is direct as of last week. Actually, it moved direct last week. And Neptune, which is still retrograde, and that's okay. We'll forgive it. Neptune's focus is also is on the mind. So it really brings in that element of how you approach this and how you think about this really will make or break the outcome of this particular situation. And that is really vitally important there. And with Pluto's focus on the past, here we have a challenge with the past. But Pluto is all about transformation and change. your personal power, and being able to take years of past abuse, trauma, miscommunication, narcissism, and make that work in your favor is a very powerful thing. It's not an easy thing. But not using it to your advantage isn't an easy thing either. So let's just throw the word easy out of it. Nothing in this is easy. Life isn't easy. It's not about making it easy. But if you do the work around it and you approach it and you approach the situation in a way where you're using the past in your favor as opposed to against you, there is a sense of power in that. There is a sense of growth in that. And that, in many ways, does make things easier in the long run. It's not something that happens overnight, but it is something that does happen. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are going to go ahead and move on to Gemini, because we still have Mars in Gemini. I think I've already given you this news flash, but Mars is not leaving Gemini this year. And eventually going retrograde in Gemini at some point this year as well, but not this week. So we don't have to worry about that, which is really good. Focus is on relationships, and we do continue to have, I should say, at least at the beginning of the week, that very challenging T-square that Mars has been in with Mercury and Jupiter. Now, the moon coming in at the very end of the week and adding to this is going to be a bit of a challenge. There was almost a quarter moon at that particular point. And Jupiter's focus is on the mind and how you think about and approach things logically, situations logically, while Neptune continues to be focused on long-term goals. What's interesting about this, because we're talking about Geminis and we're talking about how you think about or approach different situations. And when the moon is an element in this, it just sort of screws everything up, especially for Geminis, because Geminis are not necessarily known to be emotional people. It's not their go-to thing. They actually really try to rationalize their way out of emotional situations. But that also breeds overthinking about different situations. And I feel that that's really what the key word here is in terms of Jupiter's position in this, is the fact that with Jupiter being retrograde, and Jupiter is all about expansion, it's actually telling you to slow your thought process down rather than letting it run rampant at 150 miles an hour like it normally does, because that slowing that process down actually does help you to be able to approach the challenge in a way that is logical and in a way that is less emotional. And when you approach problems in an emotional way, it usually doesn't fix the problem. It tends to make the problem a little bit worse, which we all know is not necessarily a good thing. What is a good thing, though, is the Sun and Venus, as well as Saturn, all planets in air signs, all lining up in a beautiful grand trine with Mars. Now, grand trines are a way for planets to work together to help you through certain challenges, or just to boost you through various different goals or different things that you have in your life. I love it when all the earth signs come together. I feel like brilliance really shines through when the air signs come together, because that's what the air signs are all about. They're all about intellect and coming up with fantastic ideas, in many cases, ideas that change the world. And I think that the moon being a part of this is actually very interesting, because of course we don't necessarily associate emotions and feelings with ideas and logic, but they have to be used together. And I feel that that's really a big part of the lesson for all air signs this week, that feeling your way through an idea is just as important as knowing what the outcome is, or using your logic to come up with a goal and a plan. It has to feel good also. And I think that for most air signs, and Libra's kind of the exception to this, but Gemini and Aquarius are very much if it doesn't make logical sense, it isn't happening, period. Or I don't believe it, period. Or, it's not going to work, period, kind of a thing. Adding that moon element really kind of opens things up to, let me actually look at this situation and this idea and see if it feels good. What kind of feelings do I get out of this? Are they good feelings or bad? This is actually really useful information. And when all of this is focused on your relationships, it's also really important for you to be able to feel your way through that, because when it comes to relationships, you can't fix a relationship using logic. It doesn't work like that. All human beings are emotional human beings. Some are less emotional than others. That does not mean that those that are feelers should stop feeling because others don't have time for it. Sometimes we need to go get on their level just as much as we would like them to get on ours. And really, that's what that's all about. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And now I'm going to move on to Cancer. The moon just barely bumps into your sign right at the very end of the week. And we're literally talking like boop, right in on Saturday morning, focusing on relationships and actually moving into some pretty interesting aspects with the other planets, good and bad. I feel that though the challenge here is the moon is moving out of Gemini, is still very much feeling a T-square between Mercury and Jupiter. And this is a little bit of a challenge. Jupiter is very much focused on the mind and how the mind works, especially when it comes to your emotional mind. And Mercury is very much focused on long-term goals. Now, a lot of times when a person who tends to be more emotional than others, will just say, we are talking about cancers here, come up with goals, it's really important that they have support for those goals, that they have a cheerleading squad, that they have people there that say, you know what, I think that's a brilliant idea and you should do it. Because a lot of times cancers have the tendency to not follow through with those ideas if somebody says they're stupid. And it's really something that will live with them forever. Basically, they will take that feeling to their grave. And I feel that the reasoning behind that is there's a very emotional reason behind that. Cancers are very emotional people. Whether they choose to show that or not is neither here nor there. Some do and some don't. But they feel things very deeply. And I feel like this challenge is sort of coming up at this time. And it's a very small challenge, but it is a challenge nonetheless. I feel that this is coming up for you guys because it really is important for every human being to believe in themselves. There's always going to be various different reasons why the people that support you have these different opinions. And it's not necessarily just because it's a stupid idea or because they don't want to see you succeed. I mean, sometimes there is an element of that. But a lot of times, I kind of see it as being a mother, for example. If one of my kids came up to me with an idea that I thought was dangerous for them, of course, I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to talk them out of doing that because I'm uncomfortable with it. Not necessarily taking into consideration what they may have to say about it, or even what they feel about it. I am literally communicating through my concern about what's going on. And that's not exactly helpful to them. It actually gives them a very false understanding of what I'm trying to say, because of course they're taking it as I don't believe in them, or I don't want them to be happy, or any number of really crazy and destructive things. So I feel like this is really coming out for you guys this week, just because this may come up, but it's important that you take what they say into consideration. But you don't base your decision on what another individual says. Of course, come, find opinions and see what other people say. That's great and all. I love to get opinions from other people. But it really comes down to, what do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? When I look at it in those terms, it really doesn't matter what other people are saying. I'm going to go with my gut feeling. And that's really what this challenge is all about for you guys. So be brave and be bold, because I know you can. And that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are going to move on to Leo. Focuses on finances this week, with absolutely nothing to influence that whatsoever. And that's a kind of a good thing. It could be a good thing. It could be a not so good thing. In terms of it being a good thing, it just means that there are no challenges being created, but there's no help either. So it may kind of have you feeling a little bit like you're just sort of floating and you have really no direction there. If that is the case, the best thing to do about that is to sit down and, kind of take a look at various different things that you can do. I always look at those situations in life where you feel like you're just kind of sort of floating along. Those to me are checkpoints that are telling me that obviously what I have set up isn't really working for me, and I need to make some changes in order for those things to work better for me, if that makes sense. And a lot of the time, and I am one of these people also, a lot of the time people will take that as, well, I'm just sort of stuck and I have nothing to do. And usually that's not the case. We always have, there's always something that can be done. Either we're not seeing it, or we're refusing to see it, or what have you. We're too lazy to see it. We're all human beings, and we all go through those moments where we just kind of sort of get scared, frozen, kind of a thing. And when it comes to finances, this happens a lot. And it doesn't just happen to people who don't have a lot of experience with lots of money. It happens to everybody. It happens to people who have a ton of money. It happens to people whose job it is to handle money. Money is a much more emotional thing than I think we really give it credit for. And because we treat money as such an emotional thing, because let's face it, without money, you feel very insecure. When you have plenty of money, you have security all over the place. It does make a big difference. And because it's such an emotional thing, when we don't know what to do with it, when we don't know how to promote that security, or when we do know and we just haven't done it for a long time and we've been putting it off indefinitely, we create this insecurity within ourselves, because there's just too many things hanging over what we need to do, or there's just too many things that we're not doing in order to ensure our financial security. So this week really is all about that. If you feel like you are just, there is no direction, you're not sure where to go from here, you're financially strained and you don't know what to do about it, this week is the time to take a look at the options that you have and just give yourself the knowledge. Even if that means that you have to consult someone who is a professional, which I think is always a good idea. It's never a bad thing to admit that you don't know something when it comes to knowledge that you don't have. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Virgo. It's nice to be able to report to you, Virgos, that there's no planets in Virgo and there's nothing going on in Virgo, which is awesome because this has been a heck of a couple of weeks. So, nice to leave all that behind us and move on. And really, the only influence that Virgo has is Ceres, which is a secondary kind of a dwarf planet. Doesn't have a heavy influence, but it has an influence nonetheless. Focuses on long-term goals this week, and Ceres is known as the Great Mother. Very much a sort of maternal influence. And how this plays out for you, Virgos, this week is it feels very much like you may find yourself looking at your long-term goals. There's actually a couple of things that come out of this. The first is that you may find yourself looking at your long-term goals and looking at them in a very different way. Instead of looking at them in an exciting way or a what kind of fun goals can I create? I feel like these goals are more meaningful to you in some way, shape, or form. And that maternal feel really comes out in terms of maternal and self-care for yourself. Whether you be male or female, either way it works. I feel like in some cases, self-care for most of us really, or I should say for a lot of us, maybe not most of us, but for a lot of us, self-care sort of goes back to that time when you were cared for by mother, or the time that you were caring for others as a mother. And sort of bringing an element of that back into your life in some way, shape, or form, creating goals that promote that form of self-care, which is very nurturing and holds a lot of wisdom, and in many cases is all about your growth. For a lot of us, not all of us, unfortunately, but for a lot of us, mother was the person that taught us how to do things. As a mother myself, I taught my children everything that they knew how to do in their development until I couldn't teach them anymore. And then I handed them off to people who could, kind of a thing. And so, but most of the things that I taught them were how to function as human beings, how to walk, how to talk, how to clean themselves, how to feed themselves, how to address other people and communicate with other people. And these are all things that are nurturing for our own personal growth. So that's one thing that comes out of this in series for you guys this week. The other thing is there is also a possibility of having to be a mother in some cases, or having that maternal influence. And when I say this, you must know that males go through this maternal thing just as much as females do. They do it in a different way, of course, but it is still pretty much the same. It is caring for another person in a nurturing way, whether they are sick, whether they're down on their luck, whether they are just having a hard time. We all have that space inside of us, which is reserved for caring for others. And that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Libra. We've got Mercury move back into Libra, no longer retrograde. So it's not as much of a pain as it was, although it is causing a little bit of a pain. We also have the Sun and Venus in Libra as well in a conjunction. So they're actually pulling together and helping each other out, which is really cool. So, and they are in a beautiful grand trine with Saturn and Mars, as all of the air signs come together and work together for a common purpose, which I think is amazing. I always love the powerful influence of all the air signs coming together. We're going to start with the challenge, though. Of course, Mercury, whether it's retrograde or not, is the one that is responsible for this challenge for you guys. Mercury's focus is on long-term goals and in an opposition with Jupiter, which is very much focused on how you think about things, and in retrograde. And also both of these planets squared with Mars and the moon at the very end of the week, which is focused on relationships. Now, this seems like kind of a ridiculous combination when you think about it, but your relationships that pertain to your long-term goals, let's just face it, people don't always agree on what to do about the goals. If these goals are personal goals just for you, you may find that there are people who don't agree with the direction you're going in for whatever reason. And everybody always has different reasons for not agreeing with your goals. It's not just that they don't like the goal. There's lots of different reasons for that. And the thing is that when this happens, a lot of times we individual human beings have a tendency to really sort of internalize this. And for air signs, internalization means overthinking it. It means going over it in our minds to try and justify that they're wrong and you're right, or to justify that, you know, maybe this is a sign that them coming in and telling you that this isn't a good idea is, you know, the direction that we need to go in. And that's just never a good idea. I mean, granted, getting opinions from other people about what is a good idea and what isn't a good idea is always a good thing, but you shouldn't base your total decision on other people's opinions. You'll never get anywhere. This is your goal. This is your life. This isn't necessarily about them. They may be affected by it, which could, of course, be one of the reasons why they're coming up with these reasons why they don't necessarily like your goal. And you definitely have to take that into consideration. Not necessarily get mad about it. I mean, in some cases, of course, get mad about it, but have a little bit of understanding and empathy in order to understand where they're coming from. If this is your spouse, obviously this is a decision that you're making together anyways. At least that's how it's supposed to be. So you have to keep an open mind if you are, you know, if there's a possibility that there's an opposition there, for instance, with your spouse. If we're talking about work relationships and you have goals outside of that, you know, there's always those instances where people kind of get afraid that it's going to take away your time from what they need from you, and so they may oppose it based on that, or they may oppose it based on it's just not good enough for, it's not a good time for them. Sometimes you just get people on a bad day and something that they would normally think is a great idea, they're just not, because you're not approaching it at a very good time. There's all kinds of different reasons why this would come up. So it's really important to work with those relationships as much as possible, but also keep in mind that you need to do what's best for you. And, you know, you first, your family second, everybody else comes third. That's how that usually works. Now, the good news is that we do have this beautiful grand trine that I was talking about, Sun, Venus in conjunction, really focused on your career. So we're also, when we're talking about long-term goals, I feel like career goals kind of sort of come into that a little bit and have something to do with that. Saturn's focus is very much on the past and continues to be retrograde. And Saturn is all about tradition, doing things really the same way they've always been done, because let's face it, that's the only way to do it. And there's no reason to change it. I sort of think of my husband's grandfather when I think of Saturn, because they're just, it wasn't that it was a bad thing to change it. It's just, why change it? If it worked, leave it the way it was, kind of a thing. And then, of course, we have Mars and the moon to a certain extent playing into this also in terms of your relationships again. So the relationships came in as a challenge, but they're also coming in a very helpful way as well. I feel like with Jupiter's focus in that challenge on the mind, I think that in many cases our minds are really our own worst enemies when you think about it. I mean, they're great, they're helpful, being an intellectual sign. There's a lot of wonderful things about that. We come up with some really creative and brilliant ideas sometimes. But also that overthinking problem is a big problem for air signs. Overthinking it to air signs is like drinking water. I don't even think that most of us really realize that we're doing it. It just sort of happens, and we're just sort of doing it, kind of a thing. You have to be aware of the fact that you're doing it, though, because being aware of it helps you to kind of put a cap on it. Overthinking is not going to do anything for you but make you crazy. And really, there's just no time to go crazy when you think about it. Saturn's focused on the past and doing things the same way that you always did. Well, actually, in retrograde, it's asking you to look back to the past on ways where you did kind of sort of look at things out of the box. And how well did that go? And maybe mimic that influence a little bit. Yeah, it's taking a risk. And yeah, it's a little bit scary, but we're not talking about taking a risk or doing something that's a little bit scary in a stupid way either. That does make a big difference. I mean, if you are literally being irresponsible, I wouldn't advise doing that. Obviously, it doesn't always work in your favor, but sometimes you have to take a little bit of a risk in order to move forward in a goal. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And it sounds really exciting. So have fun with that. And we're going to move on to Scorpio. We have no planets in Scorpio this week. Actually, to be honest with you, next week is really the last week that the sun is in Libra, and then it moves on to Scorpio just like that. So let's enjoy the next couple of weeks. Because when the sun and Venus do, and Mercury, as a matter of fact, move into your sign, it is going to create some challenges. So first off, let's take the next couple of weeks to enjoy that little bit of a break, because it's going to be over before you know it. Focus is on those that support you, those that love you this week. And I think for Scorpios, in some cases, they have a lot of people around them that support them. Scorpios are kind of known for having trust issues, so usually it's a few really important people, and I feel like these people are really going to be prevalent for you this week, whether it's because you need the support, whether it's because they need the support, or maybe it's because and when you're talking about needing support, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing either. Sometimes you need support, you just need somebody to celebrate with because something awesome happened, and that's always nice too. And that's a good reason for needing your support group. If there's any reason at all, that's a really good reason for needing your support group. I also feel for some Scorpios, this is because Scorpios tend to have trust issues. This is a really difficult challenge for many Scorpios. To have that one ride or die person, even that one ride or die person, that one person that ultimately you can trust more than anybody else, is really important. And when you don't have that, it makes things really very difficult. Now, I want to say that for you guys this week, for those of you that do have that problem, it's really important actually to really take a hard look at the people that you do have around you. In some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, it may seem like you don't have the support, but you actually do. And it really just takes taking a good hard look at the people that you do have around you to see that. In some cases, there are some Scorpios out there that literally keep themselves so closed off from other people that they don't have that support. It may be offered, it may seem like it's never been offered, it may seem like everybody's being supported but them. And for these types of Scorpios, I feel it's really important to really, really take a deep look at your trust issues. I think that every single human being has trust issues to a certain extent. I just really feel that Scorpios sort of make an art out of trust issues more so than the other signs. And this can happen for a multitude of different reasons, but it's not about the reasons. And this is what's really important. You can have a million reasons why you have trust issues, but it all comes down to the same thing. Not being able to trust other human beings is really, really creates a lonely existence when you think about it. And it's not an existence that most people would want to live in. I feel that there's a lot of instances of people out there who deny love because they don't want to be hurt because they have been hurt. Um, and I feel like that hurts more than experiencing love and being hurt because love is a painful thing. And so I feel like this week, really, these instances are going to come up for you guys that really sort of force you to take a good hard look at what you do have, what you don't have, what you used to have, and how did that slip away. But it's not just important to take a look at it. It's important to take a very honest look at that. By looking in that mirror, it gives you an opportunity to be able to understand your purpose in building those relationships for yourself. And if you have those relationships, it's really a good time to take a good, honest look at what those relationships really are to you. Are they symbiotic relationships, as in things work for both parties? That's a very important thing. By taking stock of these relationships, it gives you an opportunity to see where things are going well and things maybe need a little bit of a help. And when they need a little bit of help, how do I approach that problem, kind of a thing? How do I smooth over the wrinkles in these relationships in order to help them to grow and nurture them in the way that they need to be nurtured? Because as we get older, people change, things happen. We always have to come back to what this relationship means for both people. And it's really difficult when it means more for one than it does the other. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I am moving on to Sagittarius. It continues to be all about you, Sagittarius. However, we're also entering that period of self-discovery as we also focus not just on the surface, but on the inner closet, that place where we stuff all those things that we just don't want to deal with right now because we don't have time for that. We stuff it into a jar and then we walk away and say, I'll deal with that later. And of course, later never comes. Well, actually, that's not true. Later does come at the worst possible time every single time, but it still comes. It just is what it is. This week, I really feel there's no planets that are influencing Sagittarius, which is good right now because there's just a lot going on right now. Having that planet influence could make things even more difficult. When you're focused on the internal self, it's not a comfortable place to be. I'm not gonna lie. We've all been there. I have chosen to go there multiple times. It is not a fun ride. It's not a pleasant ride, but it is definitely a ride that helps you to improve your performance in life. And that's really what it's all about. Um, Improving our performance is everything. If we don't improve our performance, what the heck are we doing here? I feel like a lot of people settle, um, not necessarily because they're comfortable, but because it's the easy way to go. It's easier than continuing to evolve and move forward. And unfortunately, that doesn't help you grow, and it doesn't help you learn, and it doesn't help you progress, and it doesn't help you do anything. You don't want to find yourself stuck in the same pattern that you've been in forever. That doesn't help any situation. If anything, it makes life even more difficult to get through. And all the things that you use to escape those difficulties become less fun and more challenging, for various different reasons. So this week, I feel it's really important to allow yourself to take a look at that reflection. It's not always pretty. It's not always comfortable. It's not always fun to do this. But I feel like after you do this, it really sort of clears some space for you to be able to replace those things that are holding you back with habits and things that actually might help promote a little bit more growth. What will be these things that will help you move forward into the next stage of your life. And granted, that is a scary thing, but you're Sagittarians, and Sagittarians are brave. Sagittarians love new things. Sagittarians race towards the next goal because they just have so much energy to put into wherever they put it, that they, of course, want to race to the next stage of life. But I also feel like, with things going on in the world right now, as crazy and insecure as it seems, and for those things that people, Sagittarians, have personally gone through in the last few years, I feel like it gets harder and harder for them, just like everybody else, to accept the next stage of life. Not worry about what the next stage of life is going to bring, or what that's going to look like, or is it going to be worse than what I've already dealt with, or is my happy little comfortable life all of a sudden just going to fall to pieces and shatter. I feel like, as much as we all run away from those what ifs, it really is those what ifs that keeps us going and keeps us driving. And those things, these challenges that life throws at us, big or small, they're all there to teach us something. And Sagittarians are always, always willing to learn. And if you find yourself in the position where you are just doing everything in your power to avoid that lesson, I think this week is really time to stop doing that. This week is time to just, okay, I embrace it. I'm terrified. I'm nervous as hell. I am completely and totally just freaking out right now, but screw it. Let's just do it and get our hands dirty and see what we can come up with. The thing is about life is, I guess, there's a lot of challenges. And while you're trying to stay clear of the challenges, you're also staying clear of the wonderful things that are going to happen in this next stage too. So you definitely want to look at it in terms of, the more you push it away, the more you could be missing some really cool things that you didn't know were going to happen. And even no matter what has happened up until this point, there's still so many wonderful things and adventures in store for you guys. You just have to take that next step. And that's all there is to it. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to Capricorn. Focus is on the past with Capricorn continuing this week as Pluto, our now direct Pluto, continues to be in that grand sextile with Neptune as well as Uranus. Neptune's focus is very much on the mind and how the mind works, and Uranus is focused on those you love. When you're focused on the past, this seems like a really good opportunity to just take some time. And I feel like Capricorns are work, 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 work all the time. So they never actually take the time to take it, just sit back and look at what they've created, good, bad, or indifferent. I feel like I think in many cases, Capricorns tend to not do that in case they're afraid that they're going to see something that they're not proud of, right? It's better to take stock of the things you're successful at and try and ignore the things that you weren't successful at. But nobody's perfect, not even Capricorns. There's always that little bit of balance of both. And the things that you were not successful at aren't necessarily things that you should punish yourself about. There are things that you can definitely learn from. Like, for instance, if you tried to get a degree and just could not do it, no matter what you did, you couldn't pass the test. It doesn't mean that you can't take the time now to learn to study differently and try that again and maybe pass that test and get that degree. And it doesn't matter how long and how many years have gone past, you can still do that at any time. So I feel like taking stock of, or just taking a look at how far you've come, where you started, where you are now, what it took to get here, really is helpful in terms of being able to celebrate what you have accomplished. I think sometimes Capricorns are so focused on the accomplishment, they don't really take the time to enjoy the accomplishment, to celebrate the accomplishment, to pat themselves on the back and say, hey, good job, you accomplished something. You know, that really is important. And a lot of times, and I don't really feel that Capricorns are necessarily the type of sign that demands that people pay homage every time they do something good. But I do feel that a lot of times Capricorns secretly would love somebody to acknowledge that they're doing a good job. And a lot of times they do it so efficiently that most people don't notice that they're doing the job. So they never really get that. And not getting that is really a problem because on the inside, you feel like nobody sees what you're doing. And that's not true. Two ways that you can get around that, of course, is one, don't rely on other people. Give yourself that credit, give yourself that way to go, that pat on the back, that, oh my gosh, look at me, I'm totally rocking it today. Everybody should be giving themselves that. I mean, that is just a given right there. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if you want people to acknowledge what you're doing, then say something. You cannot sit there quietly and not say anything and expect people to do what you want them to do. Sometimes you have to actually tell them. You have to lead the horse to the water. You have to put the horse's mouth near the water. Put the water on the tongue sometimes. I get you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That is absolutely true. But you can do everything in your power to make sure that that horse gets some water in his mouth, because sometimes that's what needs to be done. So I feel that that is really what is being focused on for you guys this week. And in terms of being focused on the past, which we're kind of moving out of that focus here pretty soon, it really is also about taking stock of your past accomplishments and how they pertain to your current reality. So what you're currently doing right now, and just making sure that your goals are lining up in the way that you want them to. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are going to move on to Aquarius. Aquarius continues to be focused on the past this week as well. And Saturn is continuing to line up in that sort of annoying square with Uranus. Saturn's retrograde continues this week. Uranus's retrograde continues this week. And Uranus is very much focused on those you love this week. When you're looking at the past, your past responsibilities, with Saturn being retrograde, this is kind of a tricky place because Saturn in retrograde can mean one of two things. One, you're taking on responsibilities that don't belong to you, and therefore you have more responsibilities than you should have. Or two, it's really showing you where you're shirking your responsibilities that you should not be shirking, if that makes any sense at all. So it could go either way. In terms of lining up this challenge with those that you love, we know where the challenge is. Obviously, we're in a situation here where we're either looking at, did I really take care of my responsibilities with those that I love? Or am I really fully taking care of my responsibilities to these people? Or am I taking on responsibilities for those people that maybe they should be taking on themselves? There is not a single person on the planet that can escape this problem. Okay. I think we all go through both sides of this problem in terms of shirking our responsibilities versus taking on more responsibility than we need to. And so the word balance really comes into that. I feel that it's necessary to create a balance in every single relationship in terms of, are you helping or are you enabling type of thing. It's a little bit of a challenge, but the good news is that Saturn moves into this beautiful grand trine for a short time this week with Mars, the moon right at the end of the week, as well as the sun and Venus. The sun and Venus are focused on career, and Mars and the moon are focused on relationships. Again, we're looking at Saturn being focused on the past. Now, to me, for Aquarius, I really interpret this as building the relationships around your career that really do promote success in your career. And we're looking at the past mainly as a learning tool, taking a look at where we were and are we where we wanted to be? And if not, where did we go wrong? I mean, there's always a journey. We're on a journey. I mean, kind of sort of, we're Aquarians, our heads are always in the clouds anyways, right? So it's very easy to just sort of veer off that path. For me personally, in terms of my career goals, can I say that I really am where I wanted to be 10 years ago when I first started? No. But so many things have happened between that day and this day that were distractions that have sort of veered me off my path. And I can look at that and say, okay, I accept the fact that this happened. And then the next step is, now, what am I going to do about it? And that's really the important thing. Without that part, nothing ever gets done. And that is where you take the responsibility back into your hands and say, I want this power in my hands. I do not want this power in anybody else's hand. When the power is in somebody else's hand, you become powerless. Now, we really are getting ready, talking about power, we're getting ready for Saturn to move out of Aquarius next year. It won't happen this year, but it'll happen next year. But just as that's happening, Pluto is moving into Aquarius. And we're talking about a planet that is responsible for our personal power source. So this is a glimpse into what we're going to be dealing with here in the next few months. And while most people think that having personal power is a wonderful thing, it is a wonderful thing. It's also a very heavy responsibility, and in many cases, a lot of work. So it has its moments and it has its disadvantages, just like everybody else, which is why it's really good to start focusing on this now. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And finally, we made it to Pisces. We, of course, continue to have Neptune in Pisces. The good news is that we get a little bit of a break from challenges, which is good. You guys have had enough challenges. There's been a lot of mutable sign stuff going on, and I'm very happy to report that that has really calmed down. We do still have a square between Neptune and Mars, which is a bit tricky. Mars is focused on relationships. Neptune is focused is on is the Neptune's focus is on the mind, and Neptune is retrograde. Now, Neptune is all about intuition. How does that play into the mind? That just it seems kind of crazy when you think about it, but it's not. Actually, your intuition comes through your thought process more than it does your feelings or anything else, really. And when you have an overactive mind or you're over analyzing, over worrying about certain things, that is going to get in the way of that intellectual intuition when you think about it. So being able to manage your thinking, overthinking, not overthinking really makes or breaks everything when you think about it. So that's one thing that is coming up for you guys. The other thing is there we still have that grand sextile between Pluto, which is no longer retrograde, and Uranus, which continues to be retrograde this week. Pluto's focus is on the past, and Uranus's focus is very much on those that you love. So again, we're bringing this thought process into the forefront in terms of our relationships and how our relationships are working for us or not working for us. Now, if you have problems in a relationship and those problems continue to come up on a regular basis, it's really hard to focus on anything in the relationship but those current problems. So in the past, and this is where Pluto kind of comes in and sort of helps create this bit of an influence for you. Pluto comes in and says, okay, let's broaden this out. Okay. Instead of just focusing on the problem at hand, let's focus on the relationship as a whole. Most, in terms of relationships, there's so many people out there looking for that quote unquote perfect relationship that really doesn't exist. It's just like this myth, this purple unicorn that we're all chasing, right? Relationships, a good relationship basically means that the good in the relationship outweighs the bad. You're never going to have a relationship that's nothing but good. And to look at the relationship overall, instead of what you're going through right now, will help you to be able to determine and make that decision. Is the relationship overall good, or is it overall bad? Maybe this isn't a relationship that is resonating with me, or maybe I'm just having a temporary setback right now, but in a relationship that normally is something that works very well. And by doing that, it sort of takes you out of the emotional space of the relationship to give you a little bit of a clear view of what you need to do now. And it takes you out of that headspace. That headspace is a killer. You're never going to be able to make a decision or get anything done while you're wallowing over it and over it and over it in your mind. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Good luck with that. Make good decisions. And that's what I have for everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out for another week's worth of horoscopes. Hey, if you really enjoy your horoscopes, donations are always appreciated. And there is a link below in the description for that. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Thank you for watching the horoscopes, and I will see you guys next week. Hey, make it a great week, everybody.